Everybody loves a good redemption story. And John Carpenter's 1982 classic, The Thing, is today considered one of the greats. But back then, in 1982, it was everything but that. It was often discarded. Critics almost hated it. Ennio Morricone's score was actually nominated for a Razzie, if you can believe that. And I think there's a lot of factors that weigh into that. Whether it be a generational thing, whether it just be simply ahead of its time, who knows? But we're going to explore all those things. So anyway, let's jump into The Thing Revisited. The Thing stars Kurt Russell, Keith David, Wilford Brimley, and is directed by the master John Carpenter. What is up, guys? Welcome to another Revisited review. The Thing Revisited is no crap, something that for the past 2 years I have been planning on doing. Maybe even more. And it's always tough when you review movies that are just so loved personally and globally. John Carpenter's The Thing is just that. And I reviewed this movie like 5 years ago. I did it because I got that Mondo release back there and I wanted to give a review tacked on to that. Thankfully, I created my Revisited series, and The Thing is a movie that definitely needs a deeper look into because there are so many themes about this movie that really transcend what the actual plot is, that being pretty much just an alien creature feature. To me, it's much more than that. It's about paranoia. It's about these characters who are all different from each other, and ultimately it's about trust or lack thereof. Now, breaking down the quick plot synopsis of The Thing, basically this alien ship comes to Earth like 100,000 years ago. And so in the present day, you have this science team, different trades in Antarctica. And at the beginning of this movie, this dog is being chased by this helicopter. This psychotic guy in this helicopter, he's trying to shoot this dog. He's trying to kill it. And it's backed by Ennio Morricone's score, which I mentioned that because it's really important, because the score really is your guide throughout this whole movie. And Carpenter's films are known for their scores. This is a score that's not by John Carpenter. This is by Ennio Morricone. But the dog happens upon this crew. And so this movie really starts off with chaos. And right away you realize that there's something weird, something off, and a few things really set that up, I guess. Normally you wouldn't see a dog being chased by a helicopter trying to kill it. So automatically there's something off about this dog. And so the dog ends up in the camp. And there's this scene that kind of sets up everything. It has this like ominous tone to it, and it involves a shadow. The dog, it's just making its way through the camp, and then it goes into this room, and you see this shadow turn and fade to black. And by the way, John Carpenter actually had a different actor than the actors in the movie to be that shadow, so that way it wouldn't give away who the Thing was. And we're going to get into the twist of The Thing and basically break down all the dynamics of, I guess, the reveal in this movie. And really, at the end of the day, is the reveal important? I think not. That's just how effective this movie is. It's not about the twist. It's not about the reveal. I was thinking about this movie a lot over the last week, actually, especially after giving it a fresh watch. Just thinking about the themes of it. Twist movies are a dime a dozen. There are so many of them out there. But The Thing is so much more than that. Every time there's a reveal in this movie, it's shocking, not because of who it is, but more just for how the scenes play out and the reactions of the other characters. And so really, to me, at the end of the day, it's more about the characters than, the reveal or the twist. The beginning of this movie, all these characters, they seem like a tight-knit crew. They work very well together. They get along. They're funny even. They have comedic moments. And so throughout this movie, as soon as they find out that the Thing is around them, the trust is out the window, because they don't know who the Thing could be. And once the Thing attaches itself onto a host, it pretty much becomes every mannerism and characteristic of that person. It's like it's all caught up pretty much to whatever that person's memories are. They don't really even explore that aspect of it, the methodology of the thing. It's a little bit up in the air. As a matter of fact, Carpenter added a couple of scenes in there so that way the audience didn't have too many questions about it. There's a line of dialogue that McCready gives where he basically says, "I know I'm human."
You see, when a man bleeds, it's just tissue. The blood from one of you things won't obey when it's attacked. It'll try and survive.
And even more specifically, the scene with Bennings, which is one of the first real, like, surprising moments where the thing unveils itself onto a human. Now, these characters in this movie are so effective, and really, let's jump into a few of the characters. They're broken down by job descriptions, pretty much. You know, you have a biologist, you have a doctor, you have a helicopter pilot, you have all the way down to a cook. It's a crew from all different walks of life, and they're forced to coexist with each other, which is very similar to the military, actually. But not just that, not just their career fields, but all the way down to the way they carry themselves. Like Childs is the tough guy. He's the mechanic of the crew, played by Keith David. Blair, played by Wilford Brimley, is more of, I guess, you know, he's the elder guy of the crew. And really, he's the guy that loses it pretty early on in the movie. You know, he's got major trust issues. And I think just, an overall lack of trust can feed off of itself. And that's what happens with Blair. But then you got some funny characters in here too, especially like Palmer and Fuchs. There's a few scenes early on in the movie where I was actually like gut laughing, especially with Windows, when one of the characters like yells in his ear.
You reach anybody yet?
And then Palmer is the wild card. If you wanted to compare him to somebody, he'd probably be like Kramer in Seinfeld. He's just a very weird dude. And I think that was a smart decision to have this variety of characters like that, but especially like Palmer, because he could be the thing, he might not be the thing, and you wouldn't be surprised either way just because of how out there and how weird the character is.
Shit, Doc, I'll give you the lift. No problem. Forget it, Palmer. Hey, thanks for thinking about it, though.
Now, obviously, The Thing is based off the novella Who Goes There by John W. Campbell Jr., who Carpenter was actually a big fan of. Carpenter was a big fan of The Thing from Another World, actually. Which, by the way, the director of that movie threw a lot of shade towards Carpenter's way when this movie was officially released. He didn't like it at all. But that was a very different story than this, the movie. The book is more akin to what Carpenter's vision is. He didn't want the thing to be a man. He wanted the thing to be anything. That's why the creature, and it really looks like a creature in the movie, is so much more effective, I think. Because when a man reveals himself, it's still just a man. But when the thing reveals himself, it's the scariest thing imaginable, pretty much. Now, one reason why I think these characters work so well together is because of the filming conditions. This was filmed, or at least part of it was filmed in Stewart, British Columbia. And we're talking temperatures of like 20 below zero for reals. And so when they're shooting outside and you see the breath, hell, when they're shooting inside, that's because it was actually really cold. Also, the crew and the actors, they were living on location in Stewart for the entire shoot. So this forced them to bond with each other. You know, there was this camaraderie together. They were in it together. So they had a lot more time to work on their performances, to really become their characters. And that's why the acting feels so natural in this movie. I often can compare the cast in The Thing with the cast of Alien. You know, Alien's like truck drivers in space, but those characters felt very similar to the characters in The Thing. And they're just overall very likable and even relatable. Like, you could take any person, any type of profession, and there is a character in The Thing that person can relate to. You know, like I could probably relate to Childs a little bit because he's a mechanic and I'm more of a mechanical type of person. But also, it was so cold that Carpenter literally had to keep the cameras outside. You know, he couldn't bring the cameras in and then out because I've even noticed this with my cameras. When I go outside in Florida, it's so humid outside that my lenses immediately fog up. And that's pretty much what they were facing with this shoot. Now, one character that I haven't mentioned, of course, is McCready. played by Kurt Russell. McCready is such a great character because he is the reluctant hero. He is the guy that kind of just is a loner, wants to be left alone. He's a helicopter pilot. If you read behind the scenes a little bit, they actually had a backstory for McCready. You know, he was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And really all of these characters, they have backstories that they're not the most proud of, or they're just trying to get away from whatever they were going through back in the world. So that's why they all ended up volunteering to be in Antarctica. I see this actually all the time with military guys who retire and they become contractors, and they end up working overseas even after they get out of the military because they just get almost like institutionalized. They get used to that environment. But McCready is really thrust into the leadership role. One of the other characters in the movie doesn't want to take the leadership role.
I'm sorry, fellas, but I'm not up to it.
As a matter of fact, Charles Hallahan, who played that character Vance, he basically stated that how he approached the character was, this character subconsciously knew that he was the thing, and that's why he said, I don't want to be the leader. He was almost protecting the rest of the crew. But McCready steps into that role like a glove, you know, tenfold. And really, at the end of the day, McCready, he's a man's man. You can't help but love this character. You can't help but root for him. And you'd be heartbroken if you found out that he was the thing, which he is not at the end of the movie. Now, Rob Bottin's practical effects work in this movie are the stuff of legend. This guy pretty much exhausted himself. You know, he was 22 years old when he worked on this movie. And we're talking 7 days a week, round the clock. I don't want to say 24 hours. Of course, the guy had to sleep, but the guy got very little sleep. Let's just say that. He literally had to go to the hospital for exhaustion. That's how dedicated he was to the role. He was really passionate about these effects, and he wanted this movie to stand the test of time. I don't know if he realized it, but he set the benchmark for what practical effects could be. We had never seen practical effects like The Thing before this movie, and I'll even say probably since. And yes, Carpenter's direction is Carpenter's direction. It's top notch, of course. But Rob Bottin, I think, gets all the accolades for what this movie is, because every scene where the practical effects are used are jaw-dropping. You could start with the dog scene, and really this is where the movie kicks into high gear. Before this point, the crew's still kind of figuring out what's going on with this dog. They didn't even know about it like an alien being on board. But then when they see the dog's reaction, especially when that head like splits apart and the thing just rises up in the air. The first time I saw this movie, my jaw was literally on the ground. I was just completely floored by what I was seeing. And I love when you come upon a horror film that offers something like that. And I didn't see The Thing until, I think, the early 2000s or the late 90s. Even then, some 15, 20 years later, I had never seen anything like this. And even today, younger generations are discovering The Thing, and they are seeing things that they've never seen before. That's how impactful the practical effects are in this movie. Now, two more scenes we definitely have to talk about. The defibrillator scene and the blood test scene. Both scenes are probably equally popular. But the defibrillator scene is just such a huge shock because already it's chaotic. Up to this point in the movie, everybody knows that somebody is the thing. And then in the midst of all this, you have a character who has a heart attack. And so the doctor has to take care of this person. And so what happens, he pushes the defibrillator down and the guy's chest opens up. And let me just say this, and I kind of already said it, but this particular scene right here, I still have never seen practical effects of this nature be so damn scary. And the scene is broken up into different parts, Automatically, when his chest opens up, then you see his head slide down the table. And then the famous spider head comes out. It's just the imagination of Rob Bottin in this movie. It's really just a testament of like what the imagination can do if you're a filmmaker, and whatever's in your head, you have the ability to get that out there. You just have to have the resources to do it. And luckily, Rob Bottin was that resource. But that defibrillator scene, followed by the blood test scene, easily two of the scariest scenes in horror history. And they're all in the same movie. Jumping over to the blood test scene. Everybody's eyes are on McCready. They find his shirt, and it's got the holes in it, which was obviously planted by somebody else who was the Thing. So then McCready, he feels cornered. And so he comes up with this idea, let's do this blood test, with this petri dish. I think the way Carpenter filmed that scene, the way it was panned out with the element of surprise and all that, and you have all these different characters all in the same room, which is not an easy thing to film either, by the way. The more subjects you have to film, the more complicated the shot can get, but Carpenter makes it look easy, and I think a lot of people don't even realize that. When you're filming an ensemble cast, keeping it interesting and keeping it, more importantly, scary, no easy feat. And that's why Carpenter is one of the best. He makes it seamless. But there's one scene where McCready's doing the test and he's looking at one of the characters and he says, I have a feeling it's you, that's why I'm gonna do you last. And so your brain is automatically with McCready, and then what does he do? He sticks the soldering tip in the petri dish, and it's Palmer before he even gets to that guy. And so then Palmer, his head completely splits open, his whole body comes up on the ceiling. And this is stuff that you just don't see in horror ever. Before, since, The Thing still holds up as one of the most effective horror films ever made just because of the practical effects. I could spend half my review just talking about Rob Bottin and the gift that this guy has given us. And he had the greatest horror director ever at his disposal. And I think one thing you got to consider when you're talking about The Thing too is, I really think, and I said this earlier, it's the conditions, the exhaustion of Rob Bottin, the severe weather of the location, all this stuff. I always think when the project is under the hammer, it tends to be better. When it's in stringent conditions, when everything is stretched, I think creativity thrives in those types of situations, feet to the fire. And The Thing is definitely a labor of love in that regard. Now let's talk about the legacy of The Thing. I think very few movies have the turnaround, some almost 40 years later that The Thing has. I was watching Terror Takes Shape, the doc on this, which came out in like the 90s when the Thing was first released on DVD, I believe. And it was right about that point that that shift started happening. And I think that was because it came to home video, it was being shown on TV, and a different generation had discovered the movie.
People always come up to me and say, what my favorite movie you were in was. A lot of times this happens, that they come up with The Thing as the thing.
And if you watch that documentary, the actors, they say, I think in time it's going to be a cult classic and it's going to stay that way. At that time, they didn't know what we know now, which is that The Thing is pretty much in every top 10 list of greatest horror films of all time. And I think the internet has a lot to do with that. The internet is a great resource for discovering lost films. It happened with Black Christmas. It's happening right now with movies like Alice, Sweet Alice. And it happened with The Thing. And I think one of the reasons is because discussions. People like talking about eccentric films. And for the budget, at the time, $15 million that they spent on The Thing, it's still one of the most creative films I've ever seen. And more importantly, there's just a lot to discuss about it. There are some open themes about this movie, about not trusting each other, all the way to just end of the world type stuff. This was the first part of the Apocalypse trilogy that John Carpenter created with The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness. But I think the biggest reason is because this movie is more relevant today. The current climate that's going on today. It fits in with the paranoia and the trust that is in The Thing. Nobody trusts anybody. That's exactly what's happening today. Nobody trusts anybody. McCready even says that in the movie. It's on my shirt. Nobody trusts anybody. And when you get right down to it, you can compare it to like COVID-19 and what's going on with that and how you don't know who's got it. Anybody could have it. Anybody could be The Thing. It's very relatable. And I think those universal themes that movies like The Thing explore, and it doesn't hurt the fact that it's just a very well-made film. It helps it to live on. through time. And I think it just gets stronger and stronger. I think The Thing now is more popular than ever. So anyway, guys, that is my revisited special for John Carpenter's The Thing. I pretty much explored everything I wanted to about this amazing film. For rating, I'm giving this a freaking unicorn. And I haven't given a unicorn in probably a year at least, so it feels good to give another unicorn. You know that I take that rating very seriously. I've probably only given maybe 5, 6 films that rating out of, you know, probably 1,000 reviews that I've done. That's how important The Thing is to me. So anyway, post in the comments your thoughts on The Thing. Let me know when you discovered The Thing, you know, because this is an older movie. This is almost 40 years old now. So I'd like to hear your Thing story, I guess. Let me know down in the comments. Looking forward to reading them all. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day, and on Fridays we do Free for All Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and Drumdum out.